Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your waiting time and patience. I'm pleased to be joined by our joint Special Envoy, His Excellency Kofi Annan, and the Secretary General of League of Arab States, His Excellency El Arabi. As you know, we briefed the General Assembly this morning, and we have just concluded our briefing session with the Security Council this afternoon. We also had an in-depth trilateral consultation over a working luncheon. Today, it has been sort of Syria Day as far as we are concerned. I have been spending almost 10 hours today, starting from early this morning, without any other programs. As you are already aware, the situation in Syria continues to deteriorate. Today's report of yet another massacre in Al-Kubair underscored the horrifying reality on the ground. How many more times have we to condemn them? And how many ways must we say that we are outraged? The Syrian people are bleeding, they are angry, they want peace and dignity. Above all, they all want action. The three of us agree Syria can quickly go from a tipping point to a breaking point. The danger of full-scale civil war is imminent and real, with catastrophic consequences for Syria and the region. We see little evidence that the regime is complying with its commitment under the six-point plan endorsed by the Security Council more than 2 months ago. The opposition is hardening and turning increasingly to arms. Terrorists are exploiting the chaos. Gross human rights violations are multiplying. The killing we have witnessed in recent weeks is indicative of a pattern that may amount to crimes against humanity. The confrontations in certain areas of the country have taken on the character of an internal conflict subject to international humanitarian law and possible war crimes prosecution. The international community must recognize all these realities and must act now. The Annan Plan remains at the center of our efforts. We continue to support it. At the same time, in view of the deteriorating situations, I would welcome further international discussions on the way forward. The upcoming G20 summit meeting in Los Cabos, Mexico is an important opportunity. I'll be there, and I expect that the key stakeholders to take advantage of this gathering to discuss the crisis in its full depth and breadth. No one can predict how the situation in Syria will evolve. We must be prepared for any eventuality. We must be ready to respond to many possible scenarios. At the request of the Security Council, I will soon present a variety of options for the way ahead. It is up to the members of the Council to find common course. And we are very much encouraged by such a strong commitment and the unity of voices in condemning current recent massacres. And they were all passionate in speaking out for the necessity of taking actions. But let me say here that we need bold action. We must speak with one voice. We must deliver a clear and unmistakable message. The violence must stop on both sides. We need a peaceful transition that meets the aspirations of the Syrian people. In all this, unity is essential. And I thank you very much. And I'd like to invite Secretary General of League of Arab States.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. First of all, I would like to subscribe fully to what the Secretary General have said. All the points that he have made are fully in agreement with the mandate I have from the League of Arab States when the foreign ministers met in Doha on the 2nd of June. They have asked that I convey to the Security Council their deep concern that enough is enough. We cannot accept any more killing of innocent people, whether on this side or that side. They are all Syrians, and the fighting has to stop. The League of Arab States have started last July to press on the Syrian leadership the need to stop the fighting. Nothing has happened. We have tried many things, including deploying observers. Nothing has happened again. Now it's in the hand of the United Nations. The Security Council is the organ vested with the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. It's up to the Security Council to take action now. The message I brought with me is calling for the Security Council to apply the provision of Chapter 7 relating to Article 41 in particular, that is to say, all kinds of pressure, not the use of force, all kinds of pressure should be exerted and exerted now. Fighting has to stop. We cannot let down the Syrian people anymore. Thank you.
Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you very much. I think all has been said. Let's take the questions.
Okay, wait, Talal, and please wait for the microphone. Please say who you are and to whom the question is addressed.
Thank you so much. My name is Talal Haj from Al Arabiya News Channel. Mr. Kofi Annan, many are describing your plan in the Middle East as dead, and if not, even here they're saying it's a life support. What new plans, what new ideas you have to inject in this wonderful 6-point plan that is not being implemented to resuscitate it, beside pleading and asking and cajoling the Syrians to comply? And Mr. Secretary General, what steps have you taken to comply with the request of the Security Council on the 27th of May through the press statement to investigate fully, independently and transparently the killing in Al-Hola? And Mr. Secretary General, did you find any reaction from the Security Council concerning your request to have a timetable for the implementation and to protect the civilians in Syria? Thank you so much.
You managed to get 3 questions into one. No, let me say that I'm not sure whether is the plan that is dead or its implementation that is lacking. This is what the Council has been discussing this afternoon. What needs to be done to push implementation, and what will be the consequences if implementation is not carried forward. I think the plan has been endorsed by everyone, and I've also said if this plan is not working, or this is not, we decide it's not the way to go, we should be looking at options. But as long as we all agree that the plan has merit, the question is, how do you get the Syrian government to perform, to implement it, even at this late hour? This is what the Council is in the process of discussing, and I'm not going to do their work. Thank you.
Let us answer. Through our briefings to General Assembly and Security Council today, what we have sensed is that all member states, without exception, they are united in speaking out with one voice that all violence must stop. And they have expressed a strong support for Kofi Annan's 6-point peace plans. They are united. And during our discussions with the Security Council members, many member states have proposed some indicative list of measures which should be taken as a way to sustain the pressure to Syrian authorities, as a way to stop first the violence and protect the human rights and commence political negotiation reflecting the aspirations of the Syrian people. As for the detailed measures which may be taken by the Security Council upon recommendation of League of Arab States and upon recommendation of a joint special envoy. This is up to the member states. But having participated in such a long consultation with the Security Council members, all three of us, I believe that the Security Council will take certain actions. You should also realize that it is rare that all these three of us get together at one place. Of course, we have been engaging in trilateral telephone consultations or bilateral consultations, but three of us have briefed the General Assembly today and also Security Council. This is a day for Syrian crisis resolution, and I'm very much encouraged by that.
Very briefly, I delivered the same message to the Assembly and Council. There is a need for action, and action now. I listened to very encouraging statements, period. We'll see how the Council is going to act.
So, thank you. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. My question is to the Joint Special Envoy and the Secretary General. There's been a lot of talk about a contact group. Could you tell us what that means? Is it something to bolster the plan to get all the parties, interested parties together? And has there been some progress on appointing an interlocutor for the negotiations between the opposition and the Syrian government?
Let me start with the contact group. There are discussions going on about the possibility of establishing such a group. And the group would include countries with real influence on the situation, countries that can influence either side, the government of Syria and the opposition. If they could come together and look at the problems in a coldly realistic manner, so we are facing difficulties on the ground. We have common interest in the Middle East and in Syria. What do we do to get this plan implemented? And if it's not this plan, what do we do to bring about political peace and political settlement to ensure that the region doesn't blow up? I shared with the Council something a foreign minister in the Middle East told me. Said, Syria is not Libya. It will not implode. It will explode and explode beyond its borders and cause real problems in the region that nobody wants. So if this group can really look at the issues and say, let's cooperate, and probably suggest a roadmap for the Syrians to consider and work really to steer everybody in the same direction, with those with influence on the government using their influence and those who can influence the opposition helping steer things forward, we may make progress. The other question you asked about the second part of your question about the empowered interlocutor, we are not there yet, but it will have to be done. The government of Syria and President Assad has indicated to me personally that when I ask him to do that, he will appoint an empowered interlocutor. I haven't done that because we haven't moved that. We are not there yet.
I do not have much to add what Joint Special Envoy Kofi Annan has said about this proposal. I can tell you that this is a very valuable idea worth our serious consideration. All these are very early stage. There are many ideas in terms of participants, or in terms of venue, or in terms of objective. But as far as objective is concerned, this is to strongly support Joint Special Envoy Kofi Annan's mediating mandate by the Security Council, then also to provide some ground, first of all, to stop all violence, and on the basis of that, stakeholders, very key stakeholders, limited numbers, can engage in political transitions.
Well, I think I should make a comment on that also. Any meeting, any contact group, call it what you want, that will be action-oriented and will lead to results that will cause the violence to stop, should be welcome. And that is the object, that is the criteria I have in mind, to be action-oriented and to lead to concrete steps to stop the violence.
Hi, Mr. Annan. We're all talking about how we're on the, I'm with Fox News, sorry about that. Everybody's talking about the looming civil war that could happen, but in many ways it's actually already a regional conflict, isn't it? Because you have so many weapons and fighters crossing over to fight within this conflict. From your perspective, where are we now? Are we in a regional conflict? And does really the pressure at this point to resolve this crisis need to be focused on the international players in the region more to exert pressures on the internal players, or is it still a conflict that you think can be resolved from within?
No, you are right that it's a very complex and a difficult situation. That given the level of violence and the actors on the ground, you could say we are drifting, if we are not already, in a sort of a civil war. All efforts are being made to ensure that if it were to become a full-blown civil war, it doesn't spread to the neighbors. But your second part of your question, I agree with you, and this is why the contact group, that you cannot resolve it by just focusing on the players inside. You need to have the regional and international players be involved. They have to be part of the solution.
Please.
Mr. Annan. Robert Moore with the British network ITN. You've spoken very eloquently, very passionately today about how Syria is on the edge of the abyss. I wonder what you would say tonight to the Syrian people. Should they, even at this late stage, really believe in diplomacy in your peace plan?
Let me answer your question this way. First of all, why diplomacy? Why the effort to resolve the issue peacefully? We are doing it because of our concern for the Syrian people. We should put the welfare of the Syrian people at the center of everything we do. I believe that any further militarization of the conflict will lead to disastrous consequences. By your implication, you believe that maybe a more assertive, robust action will be better than diplomacy, maybe. But the Council has given me a mandate to try to work with the parties to resolve this issue peacefully. If they decide to go another route, that is their right, but up to now, that decision has not been taken. And what I will say to the Syrian people is they have gone through a lot over the past 16 months, and the international community, through the Security Council, is trying to do whatever it can to help resolve the issue peacefully and stop the killing. The whole idea is to stop the killing, the brutality, the unacceptable human rights abuses, and it takes time. But we hope not too much time.
Evelyn, and then the last question will be Ali Baraki.
Hi. Mr. Annan and Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Mr. El-Arabi, you've spoken about unity because everyone backed the six-point plan, but yet listening to the General Assembly, the divisions were the same that they've been for the last few months. Did you come any closer in private consultation? And also when you talk about regional players, does that mean Iran, Hezbollah, so forth?
You want to go first?
I have been always emphasizing the unity of member states, particularly Security Council. Today, I also emphasized that when a Security Council is united, we have seen such a huge impact, influence in addressing many regional conflict issues. In last April, the Security Council has taken two important resolutions, 2043, 2042, allowing this deployment of UNSMIS mission there. And they have also issued a very strong statement when this Al-Hula massacre happened. Today's discussion, consultation with the Security Council members convinced me that Security Council members are very seriously engaged. Many member states have spoken out very passionately with the determined will to address this issue. I believe that the Syrian people have suffered far too long and too much. Too many people have been killed needlessly. This situation we have to stop. In that regard, the unity is essential, and whole international community must be united. At the same time, I urge the members of opposition forces, they should also be united in delivering their desires, their aspirations to see democratic and peaceful Syria. Just trying to disturb the role of the United Nations mission and trying to kill other civilians does not help at this time. Therefore, all the violence, both by government forces and opposition forces, must stop and engage with Kofi Annan so that this political negotiation can start. That's my message.
Let Al-Arabi go first.
Yes. Question of unity. The unity was demonstrated, as the Secretary General have said, in 2042 and 2043. We expect and hope that if the matter will put to the Council, we'll see another manifestation of this unity. But the question also moved around who should be involved in such action. And here we have to analyze well, the problem in Syria is internal. The people went to the street calling for democracy, liberty, as they did in Tunisia, in Libya, in my country, Egypt, in Yemen. They all were asking for their rights. They were met with violence, and that's how it started. So it's internal, the origin is internal, but to resolve it, you need pressure on everyone. And that will not come unless the Security Council will act in, together in tandem to ensure that enough pressure on all the parties. We cannot, you have to take all the facts into consideration. We cannot be like an ostrich that put our head in the sand and not see what's around us. If you're going to have a contact group and you want to resolve, get everyone involved and go ahead and try to do it, but it has to be done soon, and action should come out of that.
No, I agree with the Secretary Generals that we had a stimulating discussion with the Council this afternoon, and the question of unity was very much on the table. And I was suggesting that the unity that exists will need to be lifted to a new level. We need a new level of unity, not just amongst the Council members, but among other governments in the region and or elsewhere who have influence on the parties working together, working with the same objective. The Council obviously has to take the lead, and whatever else comes out of it, the Council will have a role to play. So I would want to see the Council, as one says, as one team with one mission, but it cannot be left to the Council alone. There are other governments who have influence, and they need to use that influence and work with the government for us to stop the bloodshed and help the Syrian people and help them escape this nightmare they are living.
Ali, very short.
Thank you. Mr. Annan, do you envision a political solution with President Assad in power? And do you see a positive role for Iran in this solution if it is possible? Thank you.
The whole idea is to get to a political transition, and the Syrian people will have to decide their future, the future political dispensation. They have to decide how they are governed and who governs them. And I think that it should be part of the eventual settlement that we are looking at. And the other thing I would want to say is the membership of the group that the contact group that was referred to. All these issues are at very early stage yet, and it's under consultation. But I think Iran, as an important country in the region, I hope will be part of the solution.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. The Security Council just heard the briefing by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and Joint Special Envoy Kofi Annan. The Council is united behind Kofi Annan's peace plan and behind his mediation efforts. The Council is reiterated its full support to Kofi Annan's efforts and also to his 6-point peace plan, and urged full implementation of Kofi Annan's 6-point peace plan and UN Security Council's Resolution 2042 and 2043. In particular, cessation of all violence without delay. Council also expressed its appreciation to the work of UNMISS and will continue to support the work of UNMISS. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, the Secretary General just said that the Security Council is proposing some measures to press the President of Syria. Which are these actions you maybe are going to take? As the Secretary General of the Arab League was asking to the Security Council to act on the Chapter 7, Article 41, I'm not wrong.
The Council had discussion on how to accelerate, how to double its efforts to support Kofi Annan's mediation efforts. I think the Council will continue to discuss, these proposals.
About this new contact group that Secretary General Mr. Kofi Annan is proposing, and in your discussions inside, what was the positions taken? Will the Council as a whole support Secretary General's proposal for a new contact group or not?
As I said, Council will continue to discuss how to gear up its effort to support Kofi Annan's effort. And we heard, his opinion about, his assessment on the situation in Syria and also in the region. So I think the Council will continue to discuss all, these proposals on the table.
Does China believe that a solution is possible without the participation of Iran in the talks?
I think that we think that Kofi Annan's peace plan is only realistic plan on the table, and I think the international community should give full support to his plan. And today the Council heard a briefing by him, and also we had some proposal on the table. The Council will continue to study, these proposals.
Mr. Ambassador, the Secretary General said that you also are preparing for all the scenarios if things goes wrong. On those preparation, are you also preparing for the control of the stockpile of chemical weapon that there is in Syria? Is in those scenarios, terrible scenarios, there is also this worry?
Well, China is opposes to military intervention. We believe it's very important to push for political mediation, to seek a political solution to the crisis in Syria. And also we believe that all the players in the region and should also fully implement Security Council Resolution 2042 and 2043. So also they should give genuine support to Kofi Annan's peace plan. Thank you very much.
What about the press statement?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We've heard this evening in the Security Council some very powerful briefings from Mr. Al-Arabi, from the Secretary General, and from the Joint Special Envoy, Mr. Kofi Annan. All of them had said that the levels of violence had increased again and had now reached the levels before April 12. That the primary responsibility for this increased level of violence lay clearly with the Syrian regime, and the primary responsibility to reduce the levels of violence therefore also lay with the Syrian regime. And they also all asked us to strengthen the Security Council's support for the Kofi Annan plan, including making clear to the Syrian regime that there were consequences for non-compliance with the six-point plan. Against this background, I suggested that the time had come when the Security Council should strengthen its support for the plan, including through a Chapter 7 resolution with clear timelines and triggers for sanctions in the event of non-compliance. That we also needed to strengthen the understanding among key international partners of the shape and timing of the political dialogue and of the political transition, which will lead to the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people being met. And thirdly, that we would need to look at the configuration of UNSMIS, which has clearly become a very vulnerable military observer mission. And I think there was a fair degree of support in the Council for these propositions. Thank you. I'll take two questions because there's a long queue.
Do you see any movement, Mr. Ambassador, on the vote at the Security Council? Any more likely that Russia and China would go along with sanctions or anything else?
Well, we're at a very early stage of this process, and of course we'll be consulting with all our partners as we take it forward.
How might the observers be reconfigured? Will you have a map?
Well, I think we all recognize that there is a great deal of vulnerability on the observer mission at the moment. The Secretary General set out a number of attacks that had been made on the observer mission, including the destruction of one of the vehicles driven by the observer mission, which had been attacked by the government forces. Now, in those circumstances, it's clear that the current configuration of the mission is not sustainable in the long term. And so I think it's our duty, it's our moral duty to consider what other options there will be going forward. And we will ask the Secretariat to do some work on that they'll bring options to the Security Council. Thank you very much. There's a long queue and I'll let others speak.
Thank you. Good evening. You've heard from a number of colleagues and you'll hear from more, so let me be brief and say that we had what was a very candid and forthright discussion in which we heard from all of the gentlemen that were here before us, the Secretary General of the Arab League, the Joint Special Envoy Annan, and Secretary General Bond, that this initiative that we have all supported, the Annan Plan, is nearing a critical point. And indeed, it is not succeeding because the government of Syria is not fulfilling its obligations under the Annan Plan. And we had a very sober and very objective assessment of the circumstances on the ground and the reasons for that failure. But what was most notable is that all three, in essence, said to the Security Council that for Council unity to be maintained, for there to be an enduring potential for a political resolution to this crisis as opposed to full-scale conflict, that the Council needed to come together and apply pressure and impose consequences for the non-compliance of the Syrian regime. That was an important unified message that we have to take on board. It happens also, as you know, to be consistent with what the United States and other members of the Council have now been saying for some while. And so it will undoubtedly inform our our considerations and our deliberations going forward. Mindful of my colleagues waiting, I'll take 2 questions.
Madam Ambassador, Mr. Kofi Annan was asked about the participation of Iran, possible participation in any contact group, and he said Iran is an important country in the region, and he hopes it will be part of the solution. Does the United States think Iran can be part of that contact group and part of the solution?
Well, I think Iran is part of the problem in Syria at the present. There's no question that it is actively engaged in supporting the government in perpetrating the violence on the ground. Now, were it to stop, obviously, that would be significant. But it hasn't shown any propensity to stop, and it continues to be actively engaged. So we think Iran has not demonstrated to date a readiness to contribute constructively to a peaceful political solution.
If Iran is excluded, you're saying they're playing a destructive role. Wouldn't they be the spoiler if you left them out of the talks and you didn't take their interests and the fact that they're a stakeholder in mind? Wouldn't that induce them to play the spoiler and to continue to play a destructive role that you described?
Well, they are playing the role of a spoiler.
But if you bring them in...
So, but let me say this. As you heard from others, this is a very nascent idea. It is just being considered in capitals for the first time. I think there are many aspects of it, much more significant, frankly, than its composition, that need to be considered before it is embraced. For example, you can have all kinds of meetings and all kinds of conferences, and there are no shortage of those, but unless it occurs in a context where the violence is ended and where the government adheres to its obligations, then there's really little that can be done to launch a political process, which is the purpose of the suggested contact group. So before we get into the size and the configuration of the table, let's be clear about whether the circumstances are ripe. The purpose has to be to fully support the 6-point plan, and for that to be viable, the principal protagonist, the perpetrator of the violence, the government, has to indicate its readiness to actually adhere to its commitments under the 6-point plan, and that's been lacking to date. Thank you.
Good evening. I will say a few words in French and turn to English. Nous venons d'entendre des présentations de Kofi Annan, du secrétaire général et du secrétaire général de la Ligue arabe. Leur constat est sans appel. Non seulement la violence n'a pas cessé, mais elle est en train de s'aggraver. Le massacre de Houlé, le 25 mai, atteste de la poursuite par le régime syrien d'une répression féroce, sanglante, qui ne recule devant aucune extrémité et qui n'épargne même pas les femmes et les enfants. Et comme vous le savez, un nouveau massacre a été commis hier à Hama. Les forces de sécurité syriennes, de plus, nous l'avons entendu ce matin et encore cet après-midi, font entrave à la volonté de la MISNUS de se rendre sur place pour constater les faits. Et je le répète, les responsables de ces atrocités devront rendre des comptes. Le deuxième constat, c'est que le régime syrien n'a respecté aucun de ses engagements au titre du plan Annan. Il est resté sourd aux appels du Conseil de sécurité, de l'Assemblée générale, de la Ligue arabe. Le troisième constat, c'est qu'aucun processus politique n'a été amorcé en raison notamment d'une absence totale de volonté du côté de Damas. Les risques, nous les connaissons tous, et tant Kofi Annan que le secrétaire général les ont évoqués, le chaos dans le pays, la déstabilisation dans la région. Le Conseil, au cours de cette séance cet après-midi, au Conseil, nous avons tous réaffirmé notre plein soutien à Kofi Annan et à la MISNUS, et je voudrais leur rendre hommage ce soir, compte tenu des conditions très difficiles dans lesquelles ils font leur travail. Mais apporter notre soutien, ce ne sont pas que des mots, ce doit être également des actions. Et nous avons entendu Kofi Annan très clairement nous demander non seulement le soutien du Conseil, mais également que le Conseil accroisse la pression, en particulier sur le gouvernement syrien. Il a dit « Le non-respect par le gouvernement syrien de ses engagements doit avoir des conséquences ». Donc ce que nous voulons aujourd'hui, c'est passer à la vitesse supérieure et multiplier nos efforts pour mobiliser la communauté internationale avec 2 objectifs. Accroître la pression sur le régime syrien pour qu'il mette en œuvre ses engagements, mais aussi, s'il ne le fait pas, qu'il en subisse les conséquences. Et deuxièmement, travailler à une transition politique crédible qui réponde aux aspirations du peuple syrien. C'est ce que nous allons faire dans les jours à venir, à la fois au Conseil, où nous allons examiner tous les instruments dont dispose ce Conseil, mais aussi dans d'autres cadres. Et je voudrais à cet égard rappeler que le Président de la République a proposé et annoncé que la France accueillerait le 6 juillet prochain la 3e réunion du groupe des Amis du peuple syrien. Briefly in English, we've just heard presentation from Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon and the Secretary General of the Arab League, and their conclusions are very clear and overwhelming. Not only has violence not ended, but it is growing worse by the day, as demonstrated by the Ula massacre, which proved that the Syrian regime is continuing its fierce and bloody crackdown. In addition, we've heard also about a new massacre committed yesterday. Not only the repression goes on, but also the Syrian security forces are hindering the UNSMIS ability to check what has happened. And I want to repeat it tonight, those responsible for those atrocities must be held accountable. The second finding is that the Syrian regime has respected none of the commitments of the Annan Plan. It has turned a deaf ear to the demands of the Security Council, the General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, the League of Arab States. And the third finding is that no political process is going on due to a total lack of willingness on the side of the Assad regime. And as the Special Envoy, as the Secretary General said, we know the risks of the present situation: chaos in Syria, destabilization in the region. In this context, we have all reaffirmed our full support to Kofi Annan and UNSMIS, and I would like to pay tribute to them tonight. But Mr. Annan has asked us for more than words. He has asked us for action. He's asking the Council to really take up his responsibilities and raise the pressure, in particular on the Syrian government, which has not implemented the Annan Plan. So what we need to do now is to change gear and really to intensify our efforts to mobilize the international community around two main objectives. First, increasing pressure on the Assad government so that it implements its obligations, and if it fails to do so, it has to face consequences. And second, to work with all interested partners towards a credible political transition that will meet the aspirations of the Syrian people. So that's what we intend to do in the coming days here in the Council, but also elsewhere. And I would just like to mention, to conclude, and remind you that the President of the French Republic has just announced that France will hold on July 6th the next meeting of the Friends of the Syrian People group. Yes, on July 6th. Thank you.
Monsieur l'ambassadeur, que pensez-vous de la proposition de Kofi Annan d'un groupe de contact des pays influents sur la Syrie, et est-ce que la France est prête à y accueillir l'Iran?
Oui, nous entendons beaucoup de propositions. Le point clé, c'est qu'il faut mobiliser la communauté internationale. Et si nous sommes clairs sur les objectifs, tout cadre est bienvenu. Mais il ne faut pas se focaliser sur le process. Je crois que ce qui est important à ce stade, c'est vraiment de travailler sur la substance, c'est-à-dire, et c'est d'ailleurs ce dont nous avons parlé au Conseil, nous avons essentiellement parlé du fond, la situation, comment y répondre. Après, tel ou tel cadre, ça reste à déterminer, et qui participera aussi. Mais le point clé, c'est, sommes-nous d'accord dans la communauté internationale sur la marche à suivre? Et à nos yeux, la marche à suivre, c'est accroître la pression sur le gouvernement syrien, travailler sur une transition politique crédible.
Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Annan just now emphasized that inclusion of Iran would be essential in this forward, because as the contact group that he has suggested, there should be created. But were there any differences, in your opinion, within the Security Council that Iran should not be included, and that is somehow hampering the process from going forward? Or are you all on board with Mr. Annan's plan?
Actually, we didn't discuss that in any detail. What we focused on in the council session was substance. We didn't discuss, this group or that conference, this contact group. That was not the point. The point is really about, do we have a common assessment of the situation? And I think we have. Do we have a common view of the risks lying ahead? And I think we have. do we have a common strategy, and this is what we want to work on. After, should this or that country take part, it will come in due time. But I think the key issue that we discussed is really the issue of substance.
So basically, in order to preserve the unity of the council behind Mr. Annan, it is essential that even the plan that his regional contact group plan will also be supported.
You should not misrepresent what he said. The contact group is not the plan. The plan is the Annan plan with its 6 points. And the question is really, are all members of the international community willing now, and with a great sense of urgency at this point, to put all their weights behind this plan so that the Syrian government actually starts to implement it? That's the key question, and that's the Annan plan. The contact group is a way, should there be an agreement to move forward in a safe direction, you know, to get all the right partners together. But it's only, in a way, a modality. The key thing is, you know, do we have a common agenda or not? And I think tonight's discussion, thanks to Mr. Annan, thanks to the SJ, thanks to Mr. Al-Arabi, has allowed us to make a lot of progress because we have a common assessment, I think.
Is there a timeline? Is there a timeline for when you want to circulate a draft resolution on Syria now?
No, I think we are not, I mean, there's a sense of urgency for sure, that there is a need for action. Now we have to put together all the pieces. You know, what we do here in the Council, different consultations which are going on here and there, you know, and we are all converging, you know. Of course, there are some official timelines, like, you know, the renewal of the mandate of UNSMIS. But at the same time, given what's going on the ground, I don't know if you'll be able to wait until then. But at this point, there's no timeline. I think the sooner, the better. Thank you.
First of all, thank you for your staying power. Today's meeting have taken place with a sad backdrop, this horrific massacre near Hama. We heard some rather disconcerting news in the briefing that the observers of the UN were denied access and that they were being shot at. And we and others asked for clarification on those incidents, and that we'll have to have a follow-up, of course. The gist of what we heard today is that Assad has failed to deliver. He has not undertaken the fundamental change of course that Kofi Annan had always claimed he should do. He has not taken bold steps, and above all, he has not diminished the violence of the Syrian government, which is the #1 priority, the prerequisite for the Annan plan to work. Kofi Annan also told us two things. First, sustained international pressure would be needed. And also, he said that non-compliance with the obligations emanating from the Security Council resolutions and the Annan plan, non-compliance would have to have consequences. And that bearing in mind, what can we do? We suggested again to have a Chapter 7 sanctions resolution, imposing sanctions on Damascus and the spoilers. That would, of course, be a very strong signal. And we suggested also again to have a Security Council mandated commission of inquiry to address and investigate those massacres that we had to witness in the past days, and to ensure accountability, which is key to any future political process. But while we are sending out those messages, of course, we have to jumpstart the political process, the transition process, and that needs intensified efforts. But let's not forget, any political transition has to be based on the cessation of violence. So that is the top priority that we've got to work on. And here the onus lies on Assad.
Inwiefern glauben Sie, dass die Contact Group mehr Aussicht auf Erfolg haben wird als der alte Friedensplan?
Sie wissen, wir unterstützen Kofi Annan und seine Mission. Wir unterstützen auch die regionale Einbindung. Wir waren immer dafür, dass die Arabische Liga eine große Rolle spielt bei der Lösung der Syrienkrise. Es kommt aber jetzt vor allen Dingen darauf an, die Voraussetzungen für einen politischen Prozess zu schaffen. Und die Voraussetzung, die Kernvoraussetzung ist das Ende der Gewalt durch das Assad-Regime. Und insofern ist das unsere Priorität. Über Prozesse muss gesprochen werden, aber es kommt auf die Substanz, auf das Handeln des Sicherheitsrates in diesem Moment besonders an.
Are you really now hopeful that Russia might get on board with what you're trying to get for the Security Council as a draft resolution under Chapter 7 and a referral to ICC?
I think we are at the beginning of a process. A couple of members of the Council today, I think, approached that possibility to have a Chapter 7 resolution, but clearly we are not there yet and it will need some more discussions. Thank you.
How are you? I have Secretary General's water, but well, we've had a very long day, as you know, of discussions on Syria, which started under tragic circumstances of the mass atrocities committed in the area of Hama. But I think the result of our discussion politically has been quite encouraging, is that the members of the Security Council unanimously recommitted themselves to support of Kofi Annan plan. The situation in Syria continues to be extremely complicated, and of course, as you heard Mr. Annan and the Secretary General addressing this issue, describing their attitude to what is going on, of course one cannot speak about even something close to compliance with all the elements of Kofi Annan plan. The government has done only a few things. Recently, of course, there were encouraging developments in them finally concluding agreement with humanitarian agencies about humanitarian assistance to the Syrian people, and the UN monitoring mission under very difficult circumstances seems to be able to do its job, which is extremely important, and we reiterate our support to the UN monitors. One element which I do believe is not insignificant, that is that the Syrian government continues at least to say that their intention is to see the Kofi Annan plan complied with, the Kofi Annan plan implemented. We also have a very difficult situation as far as the opposition is concerned, and unfortunately my colleagues whom you have heard speak before me have not really addressed that part of the situation, even though it was part of the briefings we heard over the course of the day today. And the truth of the matter is, as you know, is that armed opposition groups do not only fail to comply to the Kofi Annan plan, but they declare that it is their intention not to do so, which to us is a very dangerous development, a very counterproductive development. Unfortunately, we also have to take note of the fact that major opposition political groups, on whom some have relied as umbrella institutions which can be used in order to set and train a political process, a dialogue with the government. Now, the only thing they are doing now, and I'm referring, of course, to the Syrian National Council, is repeating appeals for foreign military intervention, which is extremely counterproductive. And this is a situation which feeds into further violence and extremely dramatic developments of terrorist attacks, and some new terrorist organizations claim responsibility for those attacks. But you and your colleagues report all those things, but all of them need to be factored in for us to try to deal with the situation politically. Now, you have heard my colleagues speak about their proposals, and indeed we did hear reiteration of proposals of various Chapter 7 sanctions resolutions and putting more pressure to the government. There is one missing link in what they are saying. They are not proposing anything which would resolve the problem of how to deal with the opposition. how to make sure that both the opposition armed groups stop violence, and how to make sure that opposition political groups contemplate dialogue which would allow them to express their vision of the future of Syria politically in a way which could combine various interests and fears and goals of the many groups which Syria is composed of. So what we have done, as some of you may have heard already, is come up with a new initiative, a new proposal for an international conference on Syria. And this is incidentally very much in line with what Kofi Annan was speaking when he referred to a contact group. But the contact group activity must start with something. And this, in our view, is a conference of those countries who can influence the situation in Syria, who has influence not only on the Syrian government, but also on various opposition groups, and who would coordinate and harmonize their own approaches and views on the situation and their own actions, and also help the Syrian groups and the government to finally jumpstart the process and through maybe activities further on in the form and shape and the contact group, bring about definitive end to violence and political end to the crisis in Syria. And let me say, today we started some discussions of our proposal for international conference. I had a meeting with the Secretary General and with the Special Envoy earlier today, and then we had a brief discussion among the Perm Reps of Permanent 5. Some fleeting references to that initiative in the course of the consultations. And I'm encouraged that we have heard some good questions asked, some considerable interest on the part of Secretary General and Mr. Annan. And as I say, I think that this is those are complementary terms which we are using. Russia speaking about international conference, Mr. Annan referring to contact group. So I hope that this initiative will proceed without delay. We regard this as an urgent matter, and that these consultations can be carried out and completed urgently, and the conference be convened. And I think some of you asked a question before. Of course, it's not something which is going to somehow replace the Security Council. The role of the Security Council will continue to be there. The goal is to support the Kofi Annan plan and make sure that there is a fair chance for the Kofi Annan plan to be implemented. And we hope that as this work proceeds, the Security Council will be coming in and supporting this work of the conference, as it did support in 2 resolutions the Kofi Annan plan. I'm sorry?
Are you concerned that this, what you're speaking about setting up in Moscow, could turn into a rival contact group to the Friends of Syria, and that both sides will then support the different parties in the civil war?
We have grave reservations, as you know, grave reservations about the whole strategy and idea of contact group. We think that it is a chapter from a different book. It is a chapter from a confrontational book, sort of replacing the government, changing the regime. So we see it as a new initiative, and we hope that even those countries who were participating in the group of Syria will realize that it is in the interest of the settlement of the crisis in the country to join into a common activity in support of the Kofi Annan plan, which we hope is going to be embodied by the international conference and the work of the contact group. Please.
Mr. Ambassador, can you tell us anything further about the substance of your 12:30 meeting with Secretary General Ban, and how would you describe or justify your government's, your country's participation in this whole issue up to this point, and what are your intentions from this point on?
Well, of course, I cannot go into details, and it was, as I mentioned, a meeting with both Mr. Ban and Mr. Annan, and they had some questions. I think that they reacted with interest, and Mr. Annan made some comments of the sort you heard him make at the stakeout before. So it was a first initial discussion, and I was encouraged that I thought that that was exactly in line with what Mr. Annan was talking about when he was referring to contact group activity. Ma'am, please.
Mr. Ambassador, how
bad would things have to get in Syria for Russia to agree to, Chapter 7 resolution or a contact group? Things are deteriorating every day.
Contact group we are proposing, Mr. Annan is proposing contact group, we are proposing international conference, I've been explaining that, but we have been over this for a number of months, as you know, and again, we had this discussion again today. What we need is a situation where signals in terms of stopping violence and starting political dialogue should be given to everybody. I mean, you can say, some say you cannot equate the government with opposition, etc., and you can have this conversation endlessly. And I can agree that, in terms of violence, one could argue that since government has continued to use heavy weapons, there is more violence, etc., on the part of the government. But we had in consultation this figure given to us that in 2 days, I think in June 3 and 4, 80 people on the side of the government were killed by opposition. This is not a kind of a violence level against government where you can realistically hope for, serious restraint on the part of anybody. This is an extremely dangerous situation. So simply sort of saying now let's lean on the government when we don't know what we're going to do about the opposition, to me is something which is not going to lead to any progress, and there might be continued slide into even further confrontation. Please, sir.
Mr. Ambassador, the Secretary General talked about all the scenarios. They said that you talked about scenarios. And you were the first one that months ago say that the situation in Syria could develop in something very, very, very dangerous. Follow up on that question. If the things don't go the way should go with the Annan plan, with the conference that you're suggesting, if the things deteriorate, what happens if, let's say, a scenario, what happens if the stockpile of chemical weapon get in a dangerous hand? Is Russia considering an intervention?
Listen, I can tell you Russia is not considering any intervention. And I think you are going well beyond my current mandate. Of course, this is a concern. And, but I think the simplest and the most direct way to deal with that concern is to make sure that violence stops.
Can you tell us, when do you want this international conference? You can't have it open-ended.
As soon as possible. As soon as possible. As soon as possible, yes.
As soon as possible, but there has to be a timeline in the sense. And do you agree with Mr. Annan's assertion today that Iran must be part of that contact group, and without that, the whole process cannot move forward?
Yes, I do. I think it would be. It's not just my view; it's Russia's view that we need to, our idea is that certainly the permanent members of the Security Council need to be there, which will maintain the link between this conference and the Security Council. Also, we believe that neighboring countries need to be invited because, some of them may not want to come, we don't know, but at least I think we need to invite them because they are there, they get most of the flack from the crisis, they have the refugees, some weapons are flowing, illegal flows of weapons into Syria through them, so, and they can contribute in many ways. And then those who are involved this way or the other. We hear complaints about Iran, so the way to deal with that is to involve Iran in discussions and make sure that their activities are in sync with the activities of the rest of us who want to have this matter finally settled peacefully. We hear Saudi Arabia and Qatar, for instance, openly speak about their financing of the armed opposition and supplying weapons to the opposition. So we may not like that, and we do not like that. But since there are clearly players there, we think that they need to be invited to the conference. And then you heard our Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov mention European Union, Organization of Islamic States, if they can sort of contribute to bring important elements to the table. So it should not be a large group, but at the same time it should involve everybody who can make a difference in a positive way. I think that the composition is important. Some say it should be as compact as possible. So I don't see, first of all, I think that we must be able to agree on the composition without making any individual elements sort of a breaking point in our efforts to put together this conference.
Mr. Annan explicitly asked the Security Council to impose fresh pressures on all parties.
You weren't. So how can you tell me what Mr. Annan explicitly
he said that here.
Come on. Last question, please, ma'am.
A while ago, you talked about how if the army is pressured to pull back, then it's open for the armed insurgents to come into an area and to be there and to cause a lot of dangerous things for people. Did anybody speak about this? And is there any plan to deal with this?
This, of course, is one of the essential elements of the Kofi Annan plan, that violence must be stopped from both sides. And one ambassador did mention that, and some others too, and spoke about commitments which we heard were made by the opposition before. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, we also heard statements recently that they do not regard themselves as bound by a Kofi Annan plan, which is extremely dangerous. Thank you very much.